Montana Territory, September 1879. The wind carried the smell of pine and wood smoke down from the Bitterroot Range as the sun cut through the trees like a blade. Naomi Oakes heard the crunch of hooves before she saw him tall in the saddle, a shadow against the light, riding straight toward the shack where she lived with her younger sister. She dropped the axe and stepped away from the woodpile, her heart drumming harder than it should have. He did not ride like a man passing through. He rode like a man with something on his mind. "Nora," she called over her shoulder, "stay inside." Nora was 18, still quiet from the last long winter when they had nearly starved. She did not argue. The door creaked shut behind Naomi as the rider pulled up. He was not clean, not polished. Dust clung to every inch of him, his dark coat, his boots, his face. He swung down from the horse with the kind of ease that only came from years in the saddle. "Name's Cashel Everett," he said, voice low and rough like gravel after rain. "Looking for water and maybe something else." Naomi stared at him. "You lost," he smiled a little. "Not anymore." She did not trust him, not yet, but she saw his hands. No twitch near his gun. No threat behind his eyes, and something else, tiredness maybe, or the kind of loneliness that made a man speak gently. "There's a well," she said. "Back of the shack, water's cold, clean." He nodded and led his horse around. She watched him. There was no reason to offer anything more. She had nothing more, just the shack, the well, and her sister. Nora cracked the door open as soon as he was out of sight. "Who is he?" "No idea. He's handsome." Naomi did not answer. She went back to splitting wood, even though her hands were raw from the morning's work. By the time Cashel came back around, the sun was dipping below the hills. He did not leave. He tied his horse to the fence post and stood there, arms crossed, watching her work. "You live out here alone, with my sister." "No man around," Naomi narrowed her eyes. "None we need." He nodded once, like he respected that. Then, "I have something to trade. I shot a deer this morning, back in my saddlebag. If you have a pot I can cook." She blinked, surprised. "You want to stay for supper?" "I want to feed you." Nora stepped out then, arms folded tight, eyes wide with curiosity and caution. Naomi gave a small nod, and Nora disappeared back inside, lighting the stove. Cashel worked beside them like he belonged. He skinned the deer clean, handled the knife like an extension of his hand. Naomi watched him from the corner of her eye, how he moved without wasting energy, how he looked around like he had been in shacks like this before, like he knew the shape of hunger. They ate in silence, the stew rich with fat and salt. It was the best thing Naomi had tasted in weeks. When the bowl was empty, she thanked him without smiling. "You from around here?" she asked finally. "No," he said. "Passed through a few towns, left one behind yesterday." "Might stay here if it's worth staying." Nora spoke then. "Why did you leave?" Cashel looked at her, then back at Naomi. "Folks did not like my kind, thought I stirred trouble." "Did you?" Naomi asked. "I never started," he said. "But I finish it." The way he said it cold, calm made something twist inside her chest, not fear. Something else. Dark came fast. He offered to sleep in the barn, but they had no barn, just a lean-to with a broken roof. Naomi shrugged and pointed to the patch of dirt near the fire. "You can stay one night," he nodded. "One is all I need." Naomi was still awake when midnight came. She sat by the dying fire, watching the sky. Cashel had not moved from the bedroll he made outside. She should not have let him stay, but something about him, his steadiness, the way he had not asked for anything but water, made her feel safer than she had in months. He rose at dawn. She was already outside, boiling coffee over the coals. "I should be going," he said. Naomi poured a second tin cup without answering. He took it, sipped, then looked straight at her. "You ever think about leaving this place? Every day?" "Why don't you, my sister, and know where to go?" Cashel set the cup down. "Come with me, both of you." Naomi stared at him. "You do not know us." "I know enough. You are strong, you are alone, you're trying to keep your sister alive with nothing but willpower and an axe, and I know I have room on my horse. I know I do not want to ride away from you." Nora stepped outside then, barefoot and sleepy-eyed. She blinked at the two of them. What's happening? Cashel looked at Naomi. I will marry you today if you want. I have the name, the papers, the coin to do it legal, and I will take you somewhere better. Naomi felt the air leave her lungs. Why? He stepped closer. Because I saw you swing that axe like you were fighting death off with both hands. And I want to stand next to someone like that. I want to build with you. I want to be the reason you do not look over your shoulder anymore. She had not cried in 2 years, but her throat burned now. Nora whispered, Naomi. Naomi looked at Cashel, at his face lined with sun and wind, at the steadiness in his eyes. You are serious. I am. She was silent a long time. Then she said, you need to shave and wash before we go into town. He grinned. That a yes, she nodded once. That is a yes. They rode into Hamilton by midday. The justice of the peace raised his eyebrows but said nothing when Cashel laid down the coin. Naomi signed her name with a steady hand. Cashel signed beside her. Nora stood by the door, holding the flowers she had picked from behind the shack. By sundown, Naomi was Naomi Everett. They rode back in silence, the wind softer now. That night, under a sky full of stars, Cashel wrapped his coat around her shoulders and pulled her close. You sure you are not dreaming? He murmured. Naomi leaned her head against his chest. If I am, do not wake me. He kissed her hair and held her like he had always meant to. And Naomi, for the first time in years, let herself believe this wild, fast, impossible thing was real. She was not alone anymore. The morning after they wed, Naomi stood at the edge of the narrow stream behind the shack, her skirts damp from dew, sleeves rolled to the elbow. A strip of linen soaked in the rushing water, stained dark with the blood from a rabbit Cashel had caught at first light. He'd left without a word, only the cleaned carcass hanging from a bent nail by the door to mark his passing. She didn't ask where he'd gone. She didn't need to. Some men moved like they belonged to the land more than to people. What mattered was that he'd brought something back. Nora crouched nearby, steadying the pot over a low flame. Her eyes darted toward the trees, then back to Naomi. Did you sleep at all? Naomi didn't answer right away. The sound of the water filled the quiet. She twisted the cloth tight and laid it across a flat rock. He doesn't snore, she said finally. Nora's mouth twitched. That's something. The rabbit stew simmered low, and by the time Cashel stepped out from the woods again, he carried a bundle of kindling strapped in leather cord and a long-handled spade slung across his back. His coat was gone, sleeves rolled up past the elbow, revealing arms marked with old burns and thin scars. He dropped the wood near the door and leaned the spade against the shack wall. I found good soil, he said. East side past the tree line. Should hold root crops if we turn it proper. Naomi stood, brushing her palms on her skirt. That land's dry by midsummer. I'll build a sluice, Cashel said. Water's close enough, done it before. Nora stirred the pot, eyes flicking between them. You planning to stay long enough to harvest? Cashel looked at Naomi, not Nora. I married your sister, didn't I? No one spoke for a while. The wind picked up, lifting the hem of Naomi's apron, carrying the scent of pine needles and rabbit fat. She turned back to the water, rinsing the cloth again. Later, while Nora napped under a patchwork quilt, Naomi followed Cashel to the spot he'd picked. The soil there was dark with old roots and layers of pine mulch. He'd already cleared the worst of the brush, a pile of twisted branches stacked near a moss-covered stump. She stepped carefully over a tangle of blackberry cane. How long were you alone? Cashel paused mid-swing, the spade half buried in the earth. Since my brother died. That was 3 winters ago. She watched him drive the blade clean into the dirt, shoulders steady beneath his shirt. What happened? Railroad company hired him to scout a pass through the Tetons, got caught in a snow slide. Took them 3 weeks to find his body. Naomi knelt beside the growing furrow, pressing her fingers into the turned soil. It was rich, better than she expected. You were close, Cashel nodded. He raised me after our mother passed, taught me horses, fire building, rifle work. I've been chasing quiet ever since. She didn't offer sympathy. She just pressed her palm flat to the dirt, grounding herself there with him. By dusk, the first row was marked with stakes cut from birch limbs. Cashel wiped his hands on his trousers and offered her the last piece of jerky from his satchel. She took it without speaking, chewing slowly as the light faded. They didn't return to the shack until the stars were out. Nora had lit the lantern, its glow spilling out onto the stoop. Inside, the air smelled of sage and wood ash. Naomi tucked her shawl tighter around her shoulders but said nothing when Cashel's hand brushed her back. Before she could step inside, he stopped her with a quiet word. "I'll build a porch," she turned, "with a bench," he added. "So you can sit out here and watch the seasons change." She searched his face. There was no charm in his voice, no grand promise, just a man stating what he meant to do. "Why?" she asked. Cashel looked up at the sky, then back down at her. "Because I want to see what you look like when you're not surviving." She didn't answer. Just stepped forward, leaned her head briefly against his chest, then walked into the house. That night, Naomi lay beside him on the narrow bed, her fingers curled near his wrist, breath quiet against his shoulder. He didn't sleep right away. He watched the ceiling, traced the line of her knuckles with his thumb. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the sound of distant wolves. Cashel listened, then turned his hand over and laced his fingers with hers. She didn't pull away. For the first time in years, she didn't dream of running. By the end of that week, the garden rows stretched clean and straight behind the shack, marked with river stones and bits of twine Cashel pulled from his saddlebag. Naomi watched the soil take shape beneath his hands, neat furrows filled with promise. He worked without needing to be told, and she found her rhythm beside him, mending the roofline with salvaged shingles, stitching flour sacks into curtains, teaching Nora to dry herbs under the eaves. The air turned sharper each morning, and Naomi began waking before the sun, drawn by the stillness. She'd sit on the stump where Cashel planned to build the porch, wrapping her shawl tight, listening to the world breathe before the birds rose. One morning he joined her, carrying 2 tin cups of boiled chicory. He handed her one and sat on the frozen ground without a word. She took a slow sip. "You always this quiet in the mornings, always this grateful," he said. She glanced sideways. "For what, exactly?" He rubbed his thumb along the rim of his cup. "I've never sat beside someone and not wanted to be somewhere else." She let that settle. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of wet soil and wood smoke from the neighboring valley. She hadn't seen another soul out there in over a year, but the thought of settlers nearby didn't sit as heavy now. "I've been thinking," Naomi said. "There's a schoolhouse in Corvallis, 8 miles east. I could walk it once a week and trade soap or stitching. Maybe Nora could go with me." Cashel watched her profile, the way her jaw tightened when she made up her mind. "You want her to be around other girls her age. She's been quiet too long. She needs something that isn't me." He nodded. "Do you trust me enough to leave her with me while you go?" Naomi didn't answer right away. She looked down at the cup in her hands, then out toward the trees. "I trust what I've seen of you," she said. "That's earned." Later that day, Cashel brought in a thick slab of pine and began shaping it with a draw knife. Naomi leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him work. She didn't ask what it was for. The next morning, she found a bench under the window, smoothed and sanded, wide enough for 2. Nora ran her fingers over the grain. "Is that for me?" "He made it for your sister," Naomi said. Nora sat anyway, folding her legs up beneath her. "It's nice." Cashel stepped inside, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. "She's allowed to sit on it too." Naomi met his eyes. "You do anything slow," he shrugged. "Only things not worth doing." That afternoon, Naomi began gathering what little they had to trade: bundles of dried nettle, a jar of rendered lard, and several bars of lye soap wrapped in cloth. Nora helped pack the satchel, quieter than usual. As twilight settled, Naomi stood at the edge of the shack's clearing, watching the last light catch on the hills. Cashel came up beside her, his hands empty. "You ever think about what you want 5 years from now?" she asked. "I used to," he said, "but it never mattered. I didn't know where I'd be long enough to plan past the next fire." And now, he looked at her then, steady and plain, now I want to build you a home big enough to hold what you've carried. Naomi turned toward him, the wind catching her braid. You don't know what all that is. I don't need to. I know you're still standing. A long silence passed between them, but it wasn't empty. She stepped closer, rested her hand against his chest. The warmth there calmed something old in her. I'll leave for Corvallis in the morning, she said. You'll stay. I'll be here when you get back. The next dawn, Naomi walked the eastern path alone, the satchel slung across her shoulder. She didn't look back until the trees swallowed the shack from view. When she did, she saw him on the bench, Nora beside him, both watching the sky like it held something worth waiting for, and in her chest, something softened. Something settled. Naomi's boots came back caked in red dust. The trail east had been dry and narrow, bordered by fallen pine and the last of the thistle bloom. She reached the shack by mid-afternoon, her legs aching from the walk, the pack lighter now after trade. A single crow watched her from the ridgeline, silent as she crossed the clearing. Cashel was mending the fence near the orchard line, sleeves rolled, a coil of wire slung over his shoulder. He didn't wave or call out, just straightened when she neared and met her eyes. How was Corvallis? She dropped the pack on the porch, letting her breath even out before answering. Quiet. A widow with 2 goats took the lard and nettle. The soap went to the schoolmistress. She asked if I'd come again next month. He slid the wire from his shoulder and set it down. You want to? Naomi nodded. There's work there. Honest work. He stepped closer, his boots brushing the frost-hardened grass. Did you eat? I had a biscuit on the road. I roasted squash and beans this morning. They're still warm by the stove. She looked toward the window where a curl of smoke drifted faintly from the chimney. You remembered salt. I brought some from the last town, kept it wrapped in cloth so it wouldn't draw damp. She studied him a moment longer, then reached for his hand. Nora went to the stream to wash her scarf. She'll be back before sundown. They walked inside together, the door creaking on its hinge. The warmth hit her slow, like light easing across a wall. Cashel set 2 bowls on the table and filled them carefully, then passed her one without speaking. They sat across from each other, the only sound the soft clink of spoon against wood. After a while, Naomi set her bowl down half full. There was a man in town, she said. Asked too many questions, said he was looking for someone who rode west last spring. A man with a scar near his eye, dark coat, quiet. Cashel didn't move. Did you tell him anything? I said I hadn't seen a soul but rabbits and trees. He didn't press. He leaned back, arms crossed loosely. Marshall didn't look like one, called himself a freight runner. But his horse was too fine for hauling goods. Cashel nodded slowly. If he comes back, I'll be ready. He tapped his fingers once against the table, then stood and walked to the hearth, tossing a small log onto the coals. There's a place I know west of here, 2 days' ride. Valley's deep, water runs year-round. If trouble's coming, we can go. Naomi didn't answer right away. She watched the fire catch the logs, spreading orange through the cracks. I don't want to run, she said. You wouldn't be, he said. You'd be choosing something else. She rose, crossed the room, and leaned her palm against the frame of the window. Outside, the wind had shifted. You could smell snow in it now. Would we be alone? Cashel stepped beside her. There's a trapper half a day from there, keeps to himself. No one else nearby. She turned to face him. You ever live in one place longer than a season? He looked down, then back up. No, not until now. The silence between them held steady, not sharp but full. Naomi reached for his hand again, this time lacing her fingers with his. If we go, we take the bench. Cashel smiled, just barely. I'll load it first. She leaned her head against his shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. When? She asked. After the first snow, before the second. Naomi nodded. Then we'll be ready. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering the last of the golden leaves across the clearing. Inside, the fire burned steady, and the 2 of them stood still shoulder to shoulder, already facing what would come next. The first snow came early. It arrived quietly, without wind, laying down a soft hush across the clearing and the trees beyond. Naomi stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, watching the flakes settle on the bench and the garden rose now tucked under burlap and ash. The morning was still. Even the birds had gone silent. Inside, Cashel was folding the last of the blankets into the pack he'd stitched from the hide of that spring deer. Every inch of it had been thought through: tools, dried beans, wool socks, the small tin box of matches wrapped in oiled cloth. They weren't leaving in haste, but with purpose. Nora came downstairs, a scarf wrapped high over her chin. "I salted the last of the squash," she said. "Put it in the crock, same place as the beans." Naomi nodded. "We'll dig them out come spring." Cashel tightened the pack straps. "We'll plant twice as much next time." Nora leaned against the wall. "What if that man comes again?" "He won't," Naomi said. "But if he does, he'll find no one here." Cashel looked over. "I left the trail marked wrong near the ridge. If he tracks me, it'll lead him north, not west." Naomi grabbed her coat from the peg and pulled it on. The lining was thin, but the stitching held. She tied it at the waist, then stepped outside. The snow gave under her boots with a soft crunch. She walked to the bench and brushed it clean with her sleeve, then turned when she heard Cashel behind her. He carried Nora's satchel and the wrapped quilt roll. His breath rose in little clouds, but his eyes were steady. "You ready?" he asked. Naomi looked back at the shack. The roof still held, the smoke pipe was sound, and the door swung even on its hinges. She had built most of it with her own hands, patched it after every storm, kept it upright through 2 winters. Now she didn't feel sorrow, only a quiet thanks. "Yes," she said. "We're ready." They left just past midday, Cashel leading the mule with the bench tied across its back. Naomi walked beside him, Nora a few paces behind, bundled and sure-footed. They took the south trail first, then veered west through the trees, following the creek where it bent around the old birch grove. By late afternoon, the clouds had cleared, revealing a pale sun behind the branches. The snow deepened in the low places, but the mule kept steady and Cashel found the trail without trouble. They camped near a sandstone outcrop that night, the fire built tight against the stone to hold warmth. Naomi sat close to the flames, hands wrapped around her knees. Cashel poured water into the kettle and set it near the coals. "You ever lived in a valley?" she asked. "Not one this quiet," he said. Nora was already curled near the bedroll, her breath slow and even. Naomi smoothed the edge of the blanket over her shoulder. "She's not a girl anymore," Cashel said. "No," Naomi agreed, "but I still see her that way sometimes." He leaned back, resting his weight on one hand. "You've raised her well, made a whole life with nothing but grit and will." Naomi turned toward him. "You gave us a way out." He looked down. "I needed one too." They didn't speak more that night, but when she lay beside him, she let her hand rest against his chest, fingers light over the steady beat beneath. The next day, they reached the valley just after sunrise. It opened out between 2 ridgelines, the snow thinner here, already melting along the banks of a slow, winding stream. A stand of cottonwoods lined the far edge, and the land beyond rolled soft and green under the frost. Cashel pointed to a rise near the water. "That's the place." They crossed slowly, the mule stepping careful over the thawing ground. At the top of the rise stood the old cabin, smaller than the shack but sound, its roof thick with moss, door still hung straight. Naomi crossed the threshold first. The floor creaked but didn't give. The hearth had soot in it, old but dry. She checked the shutter latches, then the loft beams. Everything held. By the time the sun was high, Cashel had unpacked the bench and set it beneath the window's southern wall. Nora gathered loose branches for kindling. Naomi swept the floor with a pine bough and dusted the sill with her apron hem. That night, they sat at the table with bowls of bean stew, the window fogged from the heat inside. The world outside was quiet again, but this time it felt like a welcome silence. Cashel reached across the table and took Naomi's hand. She watched his thumb move across her knuckles, slow and sure. "I want to build more here," he said. "A barn come spring. A proper stove, maybe a room with a door so Nora can have space of her own. Naomi held his gaze. And after that, a child, if we're given one, maybe two. She didn't look away. I'd raise them with you. He leaned forward and kissed her, soft and certain. Her hand slid to his jaw, holding him there for a moment longer. When they parted, she breathed in slow and deep, as if drawing him into her lungs. Then this is home, she said. That winter passed with snow and wind and quiet mornings. They stacked wood, cleared the stream's edge, and laid plans for a garden that would stretch past the cottonwoods. Nora carved spoons by the firelight and started writing letters to a girl she'd met in Corvallis. Naomi watched her become steady in her own way, no longer afraid of silence or change. Come spring, the trail up the ridge bloomed with wild iris, and the valley sang with birds again. Cashel built the barn with lumber hauled from 2 valleys over, each board fitted with the same patience he gave to everything else. Naomi planted rows of beans and turnip, her hands strong and steady in the dirt. They married again that May, under the cottonwoods this time, with Nora beside them and no one else. No papers, no townsfolk, just 2 people standing in the wind, promising what they already lived. Cashel gave her a ring carved from birch. Naomi slipped it on his finger and whispered something only he heard. They stayed in that valley all their days. Grew old with slow hands and full hearts, with porch mornings and firelit nights. Their children ran barefoot through the creek and learned to read by lamplight. Nora built a home nearby, and her laughter carried over the hills when the windows were open. Naomi never swung an axe again except to split kindling. Cashel never rode alone again, and neither of them ever had to leave anything behind again, not once. Because peace, once earned, is a thing you hold tight and never let go.